and welcome to this week's edition of World Today. There have been two important developments this week, an election and a resignation. Xi Jinping's third term as president and Liz Truss tendering her resignation as Prime Minister of the UK. On Thursday, Britain's Prime Minister stepped down after her economic policy sent shockwaves through the markets and divided her Conservative Party just 6 weeks after she was appointed. With 45 days in office, Truss is the shortest-serving Prime Minister in Britain's history. George Canning previously held the record, serving 119 days in 1827 when he died. Speaking outside her 10 Downing Street residence, Truss accepted that she could not deliver on the promises, but added that she will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen, which would mean a repeat of the tedious process of election within the Conservative Party.
I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week.
The other significant development has been in China. A third term for Chinese President Xi Jinping will allow him an iron fist control over the party, the government and the military. In fact, zero COVID policy, reunification of Taiwan, as also claims on disputed territories were top on Xi's agenda. Videos of the Galwan clash between India and China at Galwan played out at the Great Hall of People in Beijing. The Chinese regimental commander was one of the invitees at the Chinese Communist Party Congress. President Xi Jinping spoke of intensifying military efforts. Will the world see a more aggressive Chinese President Xi Jinping in the months and years ahead?
These images of the June 15, 2020 clash at Galwan in Ladakh, when Indian soldiers pushed back Chinese aggressors, were played out at the Chinese Communist Party Congress, where Chinese President Xi Jinping looks set to get an unprecedented third term. The Chinese regiment commander at Galwan, Qi Fubao, was among the 2,300 delegates and invitees at the crucial Congress at the Great Hall of People in Beijing. Regimental Commander Fubao was one of the 304 special invitees of the People's Liberation Army. Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke at length of his past 5 years' achievements. The wheels of history are rolling on towards China's reunification and rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Complete reunification of our motherland must be realized and can without doubt be realized. China watchers believe after 10 years of being in power, Xi Jinping now is virtually the most powerful man in China. His core focus areas remain consolidating his control over the army and the party. He remains the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and will be President of China for another 5 years, or as some argue, for life. This way, he becomes the most powerful man in China after Chairman Mao Zedong. Xi Jinping spoke of the need to intensify military training under combat conditions, laying emphasis on group training and to be more adept at deploying military forces on a regular basis. We will comprehensively strengthen military training, enhance combat preparedness and improve the people's military's ability to win. We will innovate military strategic guidance, develop strategies and tactics for people's war, and build a strong system of strategic deterrent. We will increase the number of new domain forces with new combat capabilities and further promote combat training. Analysts argue Xi Jinping soon will be more aggressive both on Taiwan and on the line of actual control with India. Experts say with President Xi talking about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, Beijing is likely to be more aggressive towards Taiwan if not immediately, then in the coming years.
China's issues with India are not as problematic as they are at all with America, for instance. But I mean, it's not an easy relationship, and the unresolved border dispute doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. That will always be a cause of tension. So I think there will be problems. The issue is, are they big problems or manageable problems?
However, the state of the Chinese economy, the shrinking workforce, and the impact of zero COVID policy remain President Xi Jinping's Achilles heel. Xi Jinping's third term is being watched by the world very closely. It could well be make or break for President Xi and for China in the decade ahead. Bureau Report, India Today.
UK's climate activism in extreme form is grabbing attention across the globe. In a video gone viral, a group of activists were seen dumping milk as a sign of protest while demanding a plant-based future. This is not the first act of vandalism by these activists. Tomato ketchup thrown on Van Gogh's painting, Just Stop Oil activists sprayed paint on London's Harrods. These are among many of the attacks of late. And here's more.
We are Insulate Britain, and we are here because the people that are meant to be protecting us are issuing kill policies. 330,000 British people died because of austerity choices.
First, it was the everyday commuter. Then Van Gogh's famous sunflowers painting. And now gallons of milk is the latest victim of UK's extreme activism. Several vegan protesters, part of Animal Rebellion Group, an anti-dairy activist group, poured milk on shop floors across the United Kingdom, demanding a plant-based future. This comes after two women from climate activist group Just Stop Oil grabbed the world's attention by throwing tomato soup at Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers displayed at the National Gallery in London. The act was followed by a passionate appeal to the world.
What is worth more, art or life? Is it worth more than food? Worth more than justice?
Now the two women, aged 20 and 21, face charges of criminal damage. The group also spray painted an Aston Martin showroom in London with orange paint.
We will not be stopped by injunctions that are intended to silence.
It all started with Insulate Britain's protest on Wednesday, when they literally glued themselves to the floor to disrupt traffic to Parliament. The group claimed that it was raising the demand to insulate Britain's homes, disrupted by an escalating cost of living crisis.
The Office of National Statistics said 8,500 people froze to death in their homes each year because they can't afford to heat their homes. That's only going to get worse as we've got this cost of living crisis. Millions, it would have brought millions out of fuel poverty, so they no longer had to choose between heating, eating or providing essentials.
While the messaging is noble, the internet is divided over the extreme protests. If some have backed the protest, calling it the need of the hour, others have called it a disruption of life. Bureau Report, India Today.
On Spotlight this week, we have the Secretary General of the United Nations. I interviewed him earlier this week on various issues like China and Pakistan's blocking of terrorist designations at the UNSC, UN reforms, the hijab controversy and much more. Watch. This is an India Today exclusive. I'm being joined by world's topmost diplomat, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez. Many thanks for joining us here on India Today.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
You began your visit by going to the Taj Hotel and paying your respect to the victims of 26/11 attacks. And it comes at a time when India still has not got justice when it comes to perpetrators either being booked or being sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council. The recent news of another individual's designation being blocked by China is a concern for India. How do you view the idea of good terrorists, bad terrorists, somebody's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist? The distinctions clearly are a problem in fighting and tackling terrorism, sir.
I think it's necessary to increase international cooperation in fighting terrorism. Terrorism became a global phenomenon. Terrorists are able to move from country to country, from area to area, from Afghanistan to Syria, from Syria to Libya, from Libya to the Sahel, then back to Yemen or Afghanistan. And they use the most sophisticated instruments. Unfortunately, we do not have yet enough international cooperation in relation to fighting against terrorism and in relation to creating the conditions for effective accountability. That is the reason why my first reform when I became Secretary General was the creation of the Office of Counterterrorism. And today the Office has a meaningful capacity to cooperate with Member States and to support Member States, especially in training, in advice, in relation to counterterrorism policies and in relation to the prevention of violent extremism that sometimes is the root of terrorist activities. But we need more international cooperation and we need more accountability.
Your second stint, this is your first visit to India after taking over for the second time, and your second stint is riddled with challenges. Let's begin.
The first one was not simple too.
True that, but unprecedented moments of history, Russia-Ukraine war being one. In terms of the kind of decisions that Russia has taken of incorporating 4 key parts of Ukraine into their territory, is negotiation or a negotiated settlement anywhere near in the future, or are we looking at a very long drawn conflict?
I do not expect that we have a quick political solution of this problem. I think both sides are convinced that they will win, and I think that for the moment the possibility of cessation of hostilities and the political negotiation is not in sight. Of course, that doesn't mean that people should not work for that, but realistically I'm not expecting it to happen in the short term. That is why we have concentrated our efforts as United Nations in trying to seize all opportunities to build trust or to address problems that can be solved independently of the war. I mean, as you know, after visiting President Putin and President Zelensky, we had an initiative of the UN to manage the liberation of the civilians that were in Azovstal. And then we have been working to create conditions to have the export of food products from the Ukraine through the Black Sea Initiative, and at the same time we are working hard with the Americans, with the Europeans and with other countries that have imposed sanctions on Russia to make sure that Russian food and fertilizers can have unimpeded access to world markets, and we need them. So this is the kind of thing in which we have been talking to both sides and trying to offer our good offices to solve the problems that reduce suffering in the Ukraine and suffering around the world. But peace is still, in my opinion, a bit far away.
Peace is a bit far away, but what about the nuclear threat? Is it real? You've been engaging Russia, you've been engaging Ukraine. Is the threat real, or is Russia only warning against NATO's entry into Ukraine?
If one reads the Russian nuclear security doctrine, what is said in the security doctrine, and this was invoked by the Kremlin spokesman recently, does not foresee the use of nuclear weapons related to this conflict or to what is happening and might happen in this conflict. So my deep belief is that there is no way we can accept the possibility, even the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons in today's world.
Do you think that the world is ready to deliver on climate change?
Not. The world is not ready. The world is not delivering. We are losing this battle. And that is why this initiative is important, because we need a bottom-up approach. We need each one of us to assume our responsibilities in our behavior in relation to climate change, in order also to demand to governments, in order to demand to companies, in order to demand to other key actors that they also behave, and that we are able to avoid the climate catastrophe for which we are sleepwalking without effective consciousness in the world that this is the defining issue of our time.
This is indeed the defining issue of our times. Many thanks for joining us here on India Today, sir. Indeed a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Now here is a look at what's happening across the world in World at a Glance.
Russian President Vladimir Putin signed yet another decree imposing restriction on movement in and out of 8 regions adjoining Ukraine. The restrictions apply to regions that border Ukraine and the territories of Crimea and Sevastopol, which were annexed by Russia in 2014. A protester who has been charged with illegally entering the Chinese consulate in Manchester has denied that he was trespassing. Bob Chan was dragged onto the consulate grounds and beaten up, leaving him with injuries. China claimed that Chan broke into the consulate during a pro-democracy demonstration. An Iranian sport climber who competed without a headscarf in South Korea got a grand welcome at Tehran airport. Anti-hijab protesters hailed her as a heroine. But Elnaz Rekabi, who broke Iran's strict dress code, said her hijab had fallen off inadvertently. Saad Ibrahim Almadi, a 72-year-old Florida resident, was arrested last November while visiting family in Saudi Arabia and sentenced to 16 years in jail this month. He was detained over 14-mile tweets criticizing government policies and alleged corruption.
That's all in this edition of World Today, but before I go, even during a political and economic crisis, the British humour was intact. An English publication, the Daily Star, had started a live stream a week ago where it placed a lettuce next to a picture of Liz Truss with the caption, "Can Liz Truss outlast this lettuce?" Finally, on day 7, Lizzie the lettuce outlasted the UK Prime Minister.